A man who sat by the road every single day of his life. Not because he chose to. Not because he was lazy. Not because he had given up on life. But because the world had given up on him. His name was Bartimaeus. And from the day he was born, he had never seen a single thing. Not the sky. Not the sun. Not his own hands. Not the face of his mother who loved him more than life itself. Total darkness. Every day. Every night. For his entire life. He sat by the dusty road outside the city of Jericho with nothing but a worn-out cloak and a cup. And every day, he stretched out his hand, and waited. That was his life. That was his world. Waiting. In darkness. But on one particular day, one ordinary, dusty, unremarkable day, everything was about to change. Because someone was coming down that road. Someone the world had never seen before. Someone who could do the impossible. And Bartimaeus was about to meet him. Before we go any further, if you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. Because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It is a message. And by the time this is over, something inside you is going to shift. So go ahead and subscribe now, and let's continue. Now let me take you back. All the way back to the beginning of this man's life. Because to understand what happened on that road outside Jericho, you first need to understand who Bartimaeus really was. Not just a blind beggar on the side of a road. But a real man. With a real story. With real pain. And a real heart that had been carrying something for a very, very long time. Bartimaeus was born in Jericho. Jericho was one of the oldest cities in the world. A city of palm trees and trade routes and history stretching back further than most people could remember. Merchants came through Jericho from all directions. Roman soldiers patrolled its streets. Pharisees walked through its markets with their long robes and their careful expressions. Pilgrims passed through on their way to Jerusalem. It was a city full of life. And into that city, one night, a baby boy was born. His mother's name was Miriam. She was not a wealthy woman. She was not a woman of status or influence. She was a simple woman. A humble woman. A woman whose hands were rough from years of work and whose heart was as wide and deep as the sea. When Bartimaeus was born and the midwife looked down at his eyes, those clouded, unseeing, still eyes, she understood immediately what it meant. She looked at Miriam. She did not need to speak. Her face said everything. Miriam looked at her baby. She looked at those eyes that could not look back at her. And she did something that would define the rest of his life. She did not cry out in despair. She did not ask what she had done wrong. She did not hand him away or turn her face. She pulled him close. She pressed her lips to his forehead. And she whispered into his tiny ear. You are not less. You are not cursed. You are mine. And you are loved. Those words became the foundation of Bartimaeus. Even when everything else in his life would crumble and fall away, and much of it would, those words remained. Deep in his chest. Like a stone that cannot be moved. You are not less. You are not cursed. You are mine. And you are loved. Now the world did not share Miriam's view. In those days, in that time, in that culture, blindness was not simply a physical condition. It was a verdict. It was a sentence. It was the community's way of saying, this person is outside. This person does not belong at the table. This person has already been judged. There was a theology in those days, a cruel, heartless, wrong theology, that said suffering was punishment. That blindness meant sin. That if you were born with a condition, it was because either you had sinned or your parents had sinned and God was making you pay for it. So Bartimaeus did not just grow up blind. He grew up blind and blamed. He grew up with people stepping aside when he walked near. With children being warned not to play too close to the blind boy. With synagogue doors that were open to everyone except those who carried visible marks of what the community called divine disfavor. He grew up in two kinds of darkness. The darkness of his eyes. And the darkness of how the world saw him. But he had his mother. And his mother was a world unto herself. Miriam taught Bartimaeus things that no school and no synagogue could have taught him. She taught him to navigate the world through his other senses, senses that, because of his blindness, had grown sharper and more powerful than those of any sighted person around him. She taught him to count his footsteps. From the doorway of their home to the well, 42 steps. From the well to the market, 87 steps. From the market to the city gate, 113 steps. He memorized the map of Jericho not with his eyes but with his feet. She taught him to recognize every person in their neighborhood by the sound of their walk. Every person has a rhythm. A particular weight, a particular pace, a particular music to the way they move. Old Benjamin the merchant, heavy, slow, dragging slightly on the right side. Young Sarah who sold bread, quick, light, almost dancing. The Roman soldier who passed every morning, hard, deliberate, the walk of a man who has been trained to own whatever ground he walks on. She taught him to read the world through his hands. The rough bark on the eastern side of a tree tells you which way is east. The temperature of the soil tells you if rain is coming. The texture of grain between your fingers tells you the quality of the harvest. The particular smoothness of a Roman coin versus the rougher edge of a Jewish coin, he could tell them apart instantly by touch. She built him a whole world inside his darkness. A rich world. A detailed world. A world that most sighted people never bothered to notice because they were too busy looking. And in that world, Miriam was the sun. Her footstep was the sound of safety. Her voice was the sound of home. Her hands, finding his in the dark, were the proof that he was not alone. And then, when Bartimaeus was 12 years old, Miriam died. She became sick in the spring, a fever that came quietly and did not leave. For several weeks she fought it. Bartimaeus sat beside her and held her hand and talked to her and listened to her breathing, that breathing he knew better than any sound in the world, as it slowly, gradually, reluctantly grew fainter. And one morning he reached for her hand and it was cold. He sat there for a very long time. He did not move. He did not call for the neighbors. He did not cry, not yet. He just sat there holding her cold hand and listening to the silence where her breathing used to be. That silence was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Louder than any crowd. Louder than any storm. Louder than any noise the road outside their home had ever produced. The silence of a world without his mother's breath. He was 12 years old. He was blind. He was alone. And now he had to decide what to do next. There was no decision, really. Not for a blind 12-year-old boy with no father, no siblings, no inheritance, no trade. In the ancient world, in that city, in that time, there was only one path available to a person in his position. He went to the road. He found the spot outside the gate of Jericho where other beggars sat. He sat down in the dust. He spread his cloak in front of him. He stretched out his hand. And he waited. He was 12 years old. And that is where he would spend the next several decades of his life. 1 year passed. Then 5. Then 10. Then 20. The road became his whole life. He knew every sound of it. Every smell. Every rhythm. Every season. He knew the particular sound of the road in early morning, quiet at first, then gradually filling with the sounds of a city waking up. Animals. Doors. Fires being started. The first vendors calling out their wares into the cool morning air. He knew the sound of the road at midday when the heat pressed down on everything and people moved slower and the vendors grew quieter and the dust hung in the air without moving. He knew the sound of the road in the evening when the merchants were finishing their business and the pilgrims were looking for places to rest and families were moving through with the tired, satisfied sound of people heading home. He knew the sounds of every kind of person. The heavy coins of wealthy merchants dropping into his cup, a deep, solid clink. The lighter coins of ordinary people, a softer sound. The sound of children running past, quick footsteps, laughter, the particular chaos of young bodies that have not yet learned to move with purpose. The sound of Roman soldiers, deliberate, heavy, uniformed, a sound that made everyone on the road straighten slightly. The sound of pilgrims going to Jerusalem, prayers murmured under breath, the sound of people carrying something hopeful inside them. He heard them all. And above all the sounds, above all the coins and the footsteps and the conversations, he heard something else. He heard life. He heard people living. He heard their plans and their worries and their arguments and their laughter and their love and their business and their faith and their doubt. He heard everything. And he sat in his darkness and he listened. For 20 years, he sat and he listened. Now I want you to stop here for a moment. Because it would be very easy, at this point in the story, to look at Bartimaeus and feel only pity. Poor Bartimaeus. Blind. Orphaned. Alone. Begging on the road. But pity is not what this story calls for. What this story calls for is understanding. Because what Bartimaeus experienced on that road was not just physical hardship. It was a particular kind of suffering that many of us, perhaps more of us than we would like to admit, know from the inside. The suffering of invisibility. When you sit by the road and people walk past you as if you are part of the furniture. When you call out and people look away. When your presence is acknowledged only in the brief moment it takes to drop a coin and then forgotten the instant the coin leaves the hand. When the world has decided what you are, beggar, blind man, outcast, problem, and looks at you through that decision every single time. That is a particular kind of darkness. Not the darkness of the eyes. The darkness of feeling unseen. The darkness of wondering if you matter. The darkness of the voice that comes in the quiet hours, in the cold nights, in the empty afternoons, in the moments between one footstep and the next, that whispers to you. You are nothing. You deserve this. Nobody is coming for you. This is all you will ever be. Give up. That voice. You know that voice. Maybe it speaks to you in different words than it spoke to Bartimaeus. Maybe your road looks different from his road. Maybe your darkness has a different shape than his darkness. But that voice, that particular, relentless, patient, poisonous whisper. Many of us have heard it. And what you do with that voice determines everything. Some people believe it. They let it settle into their bones. They make peace with smallness. They stop hoping. They stop reaching. They fold themselves up and decide that the life they have is all they will ever have. But Bartimaeus, after 20 years of sitting on that road, after 20 years of that voice whispering in his ear, Bartimaeus still had something. Deep inside him. Small. Almost imperceptible. But alive. A flame. His mother had lit it the night she whispered those words into his newborn ear. You are not less. You are not cursed. You are mine. And you are loved. That flame had been burning for over 30 years. Through the cold nights. Through the empty days. Through the years of invisibility. Through the accumulated weight of a world that had decided he did not matter. It had burned low sometimes. There were nights it had nearly gone out entirely. But it had never gone out. And that flame was about to meet the wind that would turn it into a fire. It started with a whisper. The way all important things start. Quietly. Almost unnoticeably. Like smoke from a fire that is still far away. Bartimaeus heard it first from a group of travelers passing through Jericho on their way south from Galilee. They were talking fast. Their voices had the particular energy of people who have witnessed something they cannot fully explain and cannot stop talking about. He knew that energy. He had heard it before, usually after a great victory in the city, or after some dramatic event in the market. But this was different. This energy was deeper. This energy was the sound of people whose understanding of the world had been permanently altered. He tilted his head and listened the way only a blind man can listen, completely, totally, with every nerve in his body reaching toward the sound. And he heard things that made him go very still. A man paralyzed for 38 years, just spoken to, told to get up and walk, and he got up and walked. 5,000 people fed with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. 12 baskets of leftovers. A man named Lazarus of Bethany, 4 days dead, 4 days in the tomb, sealed with a stone, called out by name and walked out alive. And the name attached to all of these things. Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth. Bartimaeus sat very still and turned that name over in his mind the way his fingers turned coins over in his hand. Feeling the edges of it. Testing the weight of it. He reached out and touched the robe of one of the travelers. "Excuse me. This man, Jesus, what does he do for the blind?" There was a pause. And then one of the travelers said, and Bartimaeus would carry these words with him for the rest of his life. "He opens their eyes. He opens their eyes." Bartimaeus released the robe. He sat back. And something happened inside his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Something that felt almost dangerous after so many years without it. Hope. That night, long after the road had gone quiet and Jericho had folded into sleep, Bartimaeus lay on his cloak and stared at the darkness. He stared at the darkness the way he always did. But tonight his mind was not quiet. Tonight his mind was running. Could it be true? He had been born blind. He had lived blind. He had begged blind for decades. He had long ago made his peace, or so he had told himself, with the darkness. With the permanence of it. With the idea that this was simply his life and nothing would change it. But now this name was in his head. Jesus. And those words. He opens their eyes. He lay there in the darkness and he allowed himself, for the first time in years, to ask a question he had long ago stopped asking. What would it be like to see? What would light look like? He had heard people describe it 1,000 times. Warm. Golden. Brilliant. Everywhere at once. He tried to imagine it. He could not. He had no reference for it. He had only the feeling of warmth on his face when the sun was high. That was the closest thing he had to a concept of light. What would color look like? Brown, people said, for the earth. Blue for the sky. Green for the leaves. Red for the sunset. Orange. Purple. Yellow. He turned those words over. They were just words. They pointed at something he had no access to. Like trying to describe music to someone who had never heard sound. What would a face look like? He knew faces by touch. He had felt his mother's face as a child, the soft warmth of her cheek, the gentle lines near her eyes, the particular curve of her smile. He knew faces by voice. He knew faces by smell. He knew faces by the air that moved differently around different people. But to see a face. What would it be like to look into the eyes of another person? He lay there for a long time. And the flame in his chest burned a little brighter. Days passed. Then weeks. Bartimaeus returned to his spot on the road. He held out his hand. He collected his coins. He ate his bread. He slept under his cloak. But something had changed. He was listening differently now. Before, he had listened to survive, to count the coins, to identify footsteps, to know when danger was near. The practical listening of a man managing his circumstances. Now he was listening for one thing. One name. Every caravan that passed through Jericho, he strained to hear if anyone mentioned Jesus. And they did. More and more, they did. Teaching in the temple courts, someone said. The Pharisees are furious with him, said another. He touched a leper, actually reached out and touched him, and the leprosy disappeared. He forgave a woman that the whole city wanted to stone. Just stood between her and the crowd and said, "Let the one among you who has never sinned throw the first stone." And one by one, they all walked away. "He is heading toward Jerusalem," someone said one afternoon. "For Passover." Jerusalem. Bartimaeus sat up. The road to Jerusalem passed through Jericho. His road. If Jesus was heading to Jerusalem, he would pass right here. Right past this spot. Right past the place where Bartimaeus had sat for 20 years. And Bartimaeus made a decision. Not a loud decision. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet, firm, unshakable decision deep in his chest. When Jesus came through this road, he would not be silent. He would not be polite. He would not be patient. He would not wait his turn. He would not defer to the crowd. He would cry out. And he would not stop until he was heard. The morning it happened began like every other morning. The sun rose and Bartimaeus felt its warmth spread across his face the way it always did. The city woke and he heard the familiar sounds of doors and animals and vendors and the particular music of Jericho starting its day. He walked to his spot, 37 steps from where he slept to the gate. He had counted them 10,000 times. He sat down in the dust. He spread his cloak. He stretched out his hand. And he waited. But something was different this morning. Something in the air. Something in the particular quality of the sound coming from the distance. He tilted his head. There was a sound coming from the north. From the direction of the road that came down from Galilee and curved toward Jericho. Not the rumble of a merchant caravan, he knew that sound. That was wheels and animals and organized commercial noise. Not a Roman patrol, he knew that sound too. Rhythmic, uniformed, the sound of power moving in formation. This was something else. Voices. Hundreds of voices. Not organized. Not military. Alive. Buzzing. Electric. The sound of a large crowd that has gathered around something extraordinary and cannot contain the energy of being near it. And it was growing louder. Getting closer. Bartimaeus felt every hair on his arms stand up. He reached out and grabbed the robe of someone passing near him. What is happening? Who is this? Who is coming? The person paused, briefly, the way busy people pause when stopped by beggars, and said with barely contained excitement in their voice. "It's Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth is passing through Jericho." And then they pulled their robe free and moved on. Bartimaeus sat perfectly still. For exactly 3 seconds, the world held its breath. And then something cracked open inside him. Something that had been sealed for a long time. Something that the years and the road and the darkness and the invisibility had slowly, quietly been pressing shut. It cracked open. And from that crack came a sound. A sound that started in his belly. That rose through his chest. That tore through his throat. And came out of his mouth like fire. Jesus. His voice cut through the noise of the crowd like a blade. Son of David. That title was not an accident. He had heard the travelers speak. He had heard the debates and the testimonies. He had listened carefully to the words of the prophets chanted at the synagogue on the days they permitted beggars to stand near the entrance. Son of David meant the Messiah. Son of David meant the fulfillment of everything the prophets had spoken. Son of David meant, if the ancient words were true, the one who would bring sight to the blind. Isaiah had said it. Bartimaeus had memorized it. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened. So when Bartimaeus screamed Son of David, he was not being polite. He was not using a respectful title to show good manners. He was making a declaration. He was saying, I know who you are. I know what you carry. And I am not going to let you walk past me without hearing me. Have mercy on me. The reaction of the crowd was immediate. Be quiet. Sit down. Stop embarrassing yourself. He doesn't have time for you. You are just a beggar, be silent. They pushed at him. They crowded around him. They built a wall of dismissal around him the way crowds always build walls around the people they have decided do not belong in the moment. And Bartimaeus, this man who had spent 20 years being invisible. This man who had spent 20 years being stepped over and walked past and forgotten. This man who had spent 20 years having the world decide his worth for him. Bartimaeus screamed louder. Son of David! Have mercy on me! His voice was raw. His throat burned. His whole body was shaking. But he did not stop. Because he had one chance. One chance. And he was not going to let the noise of the crowd steal it from him. And then something changed. He felt it before he understood it. The energy of the crowd shifted. The voices changed. The movement around him slowed and then stopped. And in the stillness that followed, a stillness that felt charged with something he had no word for, he heard a voice. Not loud. Not booming. Not performing for the crowd. Quiet. Still. Certain. Like the voice of someone who has never once in their life needed to raise their voice to be heard. Bring him to me. 3 words. Just 3 words. But those 3 words hit Bartimaeus somewhere deeper than his blindness. They hit him in the place where his mother's words lived. You are not less. You are not cursed. You are mine. And you are loved. Bring him to me. The same people who had been telling him to be quiet were now touching him gently. Now making a path. Now saying, with entirely different voices than they had used moments before. Get up. He is calling you. And now I need you to pay very close attention to what Bartimaeus did next. Because this is the most important moment in the entire story. And almost everyone rushes past it. When he heard those words, he is calling you, Bartimaeus did not stand up carefully. He did not gather his things. He did not fold his cloak neatly and set it aside. He threw it off. He threw off his cloak. And I need you to understand what that cloak was. That cloak was not just clothing. In those days, a beggar's cloak was his official license to beg. It was the recognized mark of his status. Without it, you could be arrested for begging without authorization. That cloak was his income. He spread it on the ground and people threw coins onto it. Without the cloak, he had no way to collect what people gave him. That cloak was his bed. Every night he wrapped himself in it and slept. Without it, he had nothing between him and the cold ground. That cloak was his entire identity. It announced to every single person who passed, this is what this man is. This is all he is. This is all he will ever be. And Bartimaeus, before the miracle happened, before he could see, before he had any physical evidence that anything was about to change, threw it off. He left it in the dust. He left behind his identity as a beggar. He left behind his safety net. He left behind the only security he had ever known. Before the miracle. That is faith. Not faith after the fact. Not faith when the outcome is already visible. Not faith when it is safe and logical and everyone around you agrees it makes sense. Faith that releases the old life before the new one has arrived. Faith that throws off the cloak while the eyes are still closed. He moved through the crowd. Hands guided him. Voices directed him. The same people who had been his wall of rejection were now his pathway. He stumbled once. Caught himself. Kept moving. He could feel the crowd around him, the heat of hundreds of bodies, the sound of hundreds of people watching this moment unfold, the particular kind of silence that falls over a crowd when something real is about to happen. And then he felt it. A presence. It is very difficult to describe. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was not what you might expect from someone who had fed thousands and raised the dead and healed the sick. It was quiet. The quietest thing in the middle of all that noise. And it was the most powerful thing Bartimaeus had ever felt in his life. He stopped walking. He knew, without anyone telling him, without any physical evidence, he simply knew. He was standing before Jesus. And then the voice came. Quiet. Personal. Direct. As if the crowd had disappeared entirely and there were only two people on that road. What do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus's breath caught. This question. Think about this question for a moment. Everyone could see what Bartimaeus needed. He was clearly blind. He had just been screaming for mercy from across the road. The answer seemed obvious. But Jesus asked anyway. Because Jesus does not assume. Because Jesus does not treat people like problems to be managed or conditions to be addressed or inconveniences to be dealt with quickly and moved on from. Jesus asked him. What do you want? Not what does the crowd think you should want. Not what does religious tradition say you deserve. Not what is realistic for someone in your position. What do you want? And Bartimaeus, with his voice steadier than it had any right to be, said the truest words he had ever spoken. Rabboni. Teacher. I want to see. Not give me money. Not give me food. Not give me a better spot on the road. Not even just give me some help. I want to see. He asked for the deepest thing. The most impossible thing. The thing that everyone around him, including perhaps himself, had long ago filed away under the category of things that simply do not happen. He asked for it anyway. And Jesus looked at him. We do not know what that look looked like. Bartimaeus could not see it. But he felt it. He felt seen. Not seen as a beggar. Not seen as a blind man. Not seen as a problem. Not seen as an obstacle or an inconvenience or an embarrassment. Seen as a person. As a soul. As someone worthy of the complete, undivided, unhurried attention of the Son of God. And Jesus said, Go. Your faith has healed you. And Bartimaeus opened his eyes. Now. Stay here with me for a moment. Because I want to slow down and let us sit inside what happened next. The first thing Bartimaeus experienced was not sight. Not exactly. The first thing was light. After a lifetime of absolute, total, unbroken darkness, the first thing was light. And it was overwhelming. He gasped. He could hear himself gasp. He could hear the crowd react around him, exclamations, cries, someone nearby beginning to weep. And then the light slowly, like disturbed water becoming still, began to resolve into shapes. Into forms. Into the world. He saw the brown of the earth beneath his feet. He looked down and he saw his feet. His own feet. He had known these feet for his entire life. He had used them to navigate the world. He knew every callus, every scar, every familiar ache. But he had never seen them. He stood and stared at his own feet for a moment that felt like forever. Then he looked up. He saw the sky. Blue. That was blue. That word he had heard 10,000 times, blue, the sky is blue, and now he understood. Not the word. The thing the word pointed at. The actual, real, incomprehensible, staggering fact of blue above him stretching in every direction without end. He looked around him. Faces. Hundreds of faces. All turned toward him. All watching. Some with tears running down them. Some with mouths open. Some with expressions he had no framework yet to read, expressions of joy, of shock, of wonder. He looked at his hands. He turned them over and back. He looked at the lines of them. The texture. The color. These hands that had been his eyes for decades, he could finally see them. He began to cry. Not quietly. Not politely. He wept the way a man weeps when something that was long dead inside him suddenly, completely, overwhelmingly comes back to life. And then he looked up. And he saw Jesus. He had imagined many things over the years. He had tried to imagine what light looked like, what color looked like, what faces looked like. But he had never imagined this. He did not see a king dressed in fine robes. He did not see a man surrounded by the symbols of power. He did not see what the world calls greatness. He saw a man in a simple dusty robe, standing in the middle of an ordinary road, surrounded by ordinary people. And yet, there was something about his face. Bartimaeus would spend the rest of his life searching for words for it. It was not just kindness. Though there was kindness there so deep it had no bottom. It was not just strength. Though there was strength there of a kind the world does not produce on its own. It was something he had felt before he could see. Something he had felt the moment he stood before him and heard those words, "What do you want me to do for you?" It was the feeling of being completely, totally, perfectly seen. Not evaluated. Not judged. Not categorized. Seen. And loved in the seeing. And Bartimaeus understood, in his bones, in his blood, in every part of him that had just been made new, that this was not just a healer. Not just a teacher. Not just a prophet. This was someone the world had been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. This was someone worth more than the miracle he had just received. And so he did not go home. He did not run through the streets of Jericho marveling at the colors. He did not find old neighbors and show them his open eyes. He did not sit down and try to process what had just happened to him. He did what the scripture says simply, quietly, without drama. He followed Jesus down the road. He joined the crowd moving toward Jerusalem. He walked away from the gate of Jericho. He walked away from his spot in the dust. He walked away from the cloak he had thrown off. He walked away from the only life he had ever known. And he followed. Now let me talk to you. Because this is the moment in the story where the story becomes your story. In this account there are two kinds of blindness. The first is the kind Bartimaeus had. Physical. Literal. The inability to see light. The second is harder to see. Easier to miss. And far more common. It is the blindness of the crowd. The crowd could see perfectly. Their eyes worked. They could see the road and the sky and the buildings and the faces around them. But they could not see Bartimaeus. Not really. When they looked at him they saw a category. A beggar. An obstacle. A distraction from a more important moment. An inconvenience at the edge of the road. They could not see a man who had lost his mother at 12 and spent 20 years keeping a small flame alive through decades of darkness and invisibility. They could not see a soul worth stopping for. Their eyes worked perfectly. But their deeper vision, their vision of other people as full human beings, as souls who matter, as worthy of interruption and attention and the full presence of another person. That vision was closed. And Jesus who could see everything, used a different kind of sight. He saw Bartimaeus. Past the begging cup. Past the worn cloak. Past the social category. Past the crowd's dismissal. He saw the man. And he stopped. For him. For the invisible one. For the one the crowd was trying to silence. Now I want to ask you something. Who in your life is being silenced? Who is the person at the edge of the road that the crowd around you has decided doesn't matter, doesn't belong, doesn't deserve the interruption of your attention? Because the invitation of this story is not just to be like Bartimaeus. It is also to see like Jesus. To have the kind of eyes that cut through categories and labels and social positions and see the person underneath. To be the kind of person who stops. Who asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" Who actually waits for the answer. And now let me speak to the Bartimaeus in you. Because there is one. There is a part of you that has been sitting by the road. Not necessarily physically. Not necessarily in poverty or blindness. But in some area of your life, there is a version of you that has been waiting. That has been invisible. That has been defined by a condition, a limitation, a label, a failure, a loss. That has been hearing the whisper. You are nothing. You deserve this. Nobody is coming. This is all you will ever be. Give up. And maybe you have been listening to that whisper longer than you would like to admit. I want you to hear something today. The crowd does not determine your access. The crowd does not control who Jesus stops for. The people telling you to be quiet are not the gatekeepers of your miracle. Their opinion of what is possible for you is not the final word on what is possible for you. Bartimaeus was surrounded by people committed to his silence. And Jesus still heard him. One cry. One honest, desperate, I don't care what anyone thinks cry. And heaven stopped. That is the nature of this grace. It is not dispensed by committee. It is not rationed by the approval of the crowd. It does not require the permission of the people around you. Cry out. And do not let them silence you. And then, when you hear the voice say come, throw off the cloak. Whatever it is. The identity that has become a cage. The narrative that keeps you defined as what you were instead of what you are becoming. The security you have settled for that is keeping you from what you were made for. The story you keep telling yourself about why your miracle is not possible. Throw it off. Before the miracle arrives. Before you can see the outcome. Before it makes logical sense. Throw it off. Because you cannot receive what is coming with both hands full of what you have settled for. And when you stand before Him, when you feel that presence, that quiet, that complete and total attention turned toward you, He is going to ask you a question. What do you want me to do for you? Not what does everyone around you think you should want. Not what have you been told is realistic for someone like you. Not what is safe and manageable and within the boundaries of what people in your position are supposed to ask for. What do you want? Ask for the big thing. Ask for the real thing. Ask for the thing you have been afraid to say out loud because it feels too large, too impossible, too much. Your faith does not need to be polished. It does not need to be theologically sophisticated. It does not need to be impressive. It just needs to be honest. And loud enough to cut through the noise. Go. Your faith has healed you. The road to Jerusalem is still open. The voice is still calling. The crowd is still loud. But one cry is enough. Cry out. Don't let them silence you. Throw off the cloak. Run toward the voice. And when your eyes open, follow. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this story. If this message touched something in you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do so now, because there are more stories coming. Stories with depth. Stories with truth. Stories that will stay with you long after the video ends. This has been the man who finally saw. And the moral is this. The greatest blindness is not the inability to see light. The greatest blindness is the inability to see worth. The worth in the person at the edge of the road. The worth in the dream you have been afraid to speak. The worth in yourself, not because of what you have achieved or what you can offer, but simply because you are seen by the one who stopped for you. God bless you. And I will see you in the next story. Subscribe right now. And hit that notification bell. Because this is not just a channel. This is a place where stories come alive. Stories that do not just entertain you, stories that reach inside you and rearrange something. Stories that stay with you when the video ends. Stories that you find yourself thinking about at 2 in the morning when the world is quiet and the real questions come. Every story on this channel carries a moral. A truth. Something you can carry into your day, your week, your life. Because that is what real stories do. They do not just pass through you. They change you.